and pleased that you're able to join us. We do have a speaker missing in action, but we do have another speaker anyway. So we've got Nils is here, but Sarah, we're not quite sure what's happened. But we'll start anyway and see where we get to. So Hannah is going to share the slides, and I'll just introduce Cascade briefly before we move on to our main speaker. So if you'd like to just yes. So for those of you who don't know Cascade, I thought I'd just give you a very brief introduction to our network. And it's a network that has been going for about a year now, bringing together higher education institutions from all across the UK to try to find sustainable and socially just solutions to the biodiversity crisis, working in partnership with people who are developing and implementing policy, and particularly within the framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we came together because we believe that it's only by collaboration and by sharing and by working together that universities are going to be able to play their part in addressing our global biodiversity crisis. Next slide, please. Cascade has grown organically over the last year, and now we have 33 members, and you can see we're pretty evenly spread across the UK, and we include both universities and other kind of higher education institutions, such as the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and Zoological Society of London. Anyone who is on this call and would like to join Cascade, we're an open and inclusive network. Now, the reason why Cascade is needed has been set out quite clearly by this report by the UNEP WCMC about what is needed for global biodiversity-related capacity building to support our international conventions. So that report highlighted that there are inadequacies in networking and knowledge sharing, and that inadequacy is between academia and professionals and governments. It's also insufficient coordination between and within academia, government, and stakeholders, and therefore this need to establish a science policy bridge that allows us to build our capabilities together to have better interactions towards more effective policy. So that's the reason why we've got Cascade here. Next slide. As I said, we're a 2-year pilot project, and we are trying to understand what makes for good knowledge exchange partnerships, working with our end users, and trying to deepen our partnerships both within our universities and between our universities, and that includes between academics and knowledge exchange professionals as well. And to work with our key initial partners, the CBD Secretariat, JNCC and DEFRA, to establish Cascade's potential to contribute to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, both nationally and internationally. So as part of this, and particularly with the knowledge exchange element, we decided that it would be really good to hold a series of webinars about some of the things that we're learning about how to do really good knowledge exchange and how to interact effectively with policy. So we've got external speakers who are going to come over the next 6 webinars in our series to tell us something about their experiences that we can all learn from, and hopefully to get a really good discussion, a lively discussion going. So with that, I'd like to just introduce our speaker, who's Nils Bunnefeld. Nils is the Professor of Biological and Environmental Sciences at the University of Stirling, and he's the co-chair of Eklipse, which is a network of European scientists, which Nils will give you a little bit more information about. And Nils, as an academic, works on the interface between biodiversity and society, combining natural and social sciences to improve our understanding of decision-making from local to global levels along a range of environmental issues. And his contributions to science and policy linkages include his role as the co-chair of Eklipse and also working with the UNEP agreement on the conservation of African Eurasian migratory water birds. So welcome, Nils. Thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, EJ, for inviting me to this CASCADE webinar. It's really nice to be here, and it's nice to be part of such a kind of dynamic and visionary approach to science policy. Today, I would like to talk to you a little bit about Eklipse, and I thought it would be good to start with a vision of Eklipse that we are still following, and that is to ensure that a sustainable future in which decisions affecting biodiversity and ecosystem services are based on trusted evidence provided by experts following an ethical and transparent process. Next slide, please. So Eklipse is since 2020 a self-sustaining mechanism based at the NGO Alternet, and before it was funded by the European Commission to as a Horizon project to further the kind of science policy interface and make it actually working and happening. Since then, we have had 19 evidence reports on policy relevant topics. I will give you some examples in a minute. And we have still 3 ongoing processes at the moment, so 3 ongoing evidence requests from DG Environment, DG Mare at the moment. In the past, examples of our requesters, of course, include, as I already said, the European Commission and European Environment Agency, but also national ministries in France, Scottish Environment Protection Agency, the IUCN, French OFB. So quite a wide range of requesters and stakeholders and partners we work with. Next slide, please. So here is an example of what we've done recently. We got a request from the project called Empower Us. It's a Horizon funded project. And the question was to put together a range of, or an overview of nature-based solutions and empowerment tools, how they can build resilient coastal communities. So we put together a report that you can see here on the left, an Eklipse report, and we are now producing basically a scientific paper on this as well. But what is maybe more interesting in this context, in this webinar, is that we worked with Biodiversity Plus now to update their stakeholder handbook. So they read our report and said, oh, this is really interesting that we now have a really good overview of the current empowerment tools and nature-based solutions, how they work together to build these resilient coastal communities. So this is something that we're working on at the moment, and I think is a really interesting kind of link between Eklipse and also how it then kind of goes on to have further impact in other networks. Next slide, please. So what we're doing at the moment, a big project that Eklipse is involved in is really that the European Commission, so we'll start right at the left-hand side of this slide, and the European Commission staff have identified now that they really want to move forward and take this also in-house, this idea of how can they tap into all this knowledge that is out there on biodiversity? How can they make it work much better for biodiversity policy and the wider kind of policy frameworks that they are putting together at the moment? So the idea is that anyone from the European Commission staff can put together a knowledge request to the Knowledge Center for Biodiversity, and they have developed a ticketing system. So you can, so to speak, submit a ticket. That goes to the science service, or the future science service that is under development at the moment. And we are developing together with the European Commission this answering request support function. looking at building a database of previous inquiries, working with, again, Biodiversity, for example, important partners. And once we have identified that this is a kind of good question, we are trialing this together with Eklipse to look at whether this is a in-depth request, so somewhere between 8 or 18 months, or whether that is a really urgent request. It will then go back to in-house in the European Commission, so for example, the Joint Research Center. But when we decide that, and we're testing this at the moment as part of the BioAgora project, once we decide that this is actually an in-depth request, we follow the Eklipse process. I will tell you about a bit in a minute, and we're really putting it out to the wider community and networks of scientists around the world, actually, to see what knowledge is available that is relevant for policy making. So this is something that is very exciting for Eklipse to be involved in, because it's really shaping the way that the European Commission takes into account and integrates the latest knowledge on biodiversity into their decision making and their policy making, policy writing. Next slide, please. So this looks like a bit of a big slide, but I wanted to tell you why and how we think Eklipse is actually a proven and robust process to answer policy relevant requests. So we start again on the left. You can see a 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So this is how we go through the slide now. So let's say there is a knowledge need from, for example, the European Commission, from any of the DGs, to set new policies, to go forward with new ideas. They have a knowledge need. And so they are contacting Eklipse, and they say, well, here we have a request. What is the current knowledge on, for example, the effect of offshore wind farms? We have at the moment a request, offshore wind farms on biodiversity. The first thing we do is we do a scoping phase, scoping and framing the request. And as part of this, in Eklipse, we discuss whether this request is policy relevant, whether there is knowledge out there, but we don't leave it there. The first important public aspect of this is a call for knowledge. We put it out on our website, we put it out to our networks. We ask anyone to let us know, is there any knowledge out there? Do you have papers? Do you have reports? Do you have ongoing projects? So this is the first call where we ask actually anyone that has knowledge to let us know. And I think that's really important to widen the participation in this science policy interface. Once we have decided that this is an important request and there is no duplication with other initiatives or other knowledge that is already out there, we then go into phase 3, the actual Eklipse request. We then go and form an EWG, so an expert working group. And again, we call for experts. This is completely public. We have very clear criteria, what we want from the experts, what these experts should look like. And anyone out there can apply to become an expert. We normally select around 15 experts. Depending on the topic, we get sometimes 20, 30 people applying, sometimes 150. It really depends on the topic, but we always get a lot of interest. So it shows that there's lots of people out there that are willing and super interested in contributing to this science policy. So then we select these experts and they form the expert working group. Then something called the MEG in yellow, Methods Expert Group, come into play here, and they are part of Eklipse, and they will then help the expert working group to identify the best methods that will answer this request. Well, we all know, of course, that there is a systematic literature review or focus group, but we're also thinking of many other methods. We've got a catalog of methods, 20 in fact. And it could be also something like multi-criteria decision analysis. or a Bayesian belief network. So really targeting the methods to the specific requester. Once we've decided that this is a good idea, we write a protocol of methods and approach. And again, we ask for peer review. We asked outside our network, we put it out there in public, and we ask for reviews. We need at least 6 reviews to move forward. We will change our methods. We will respond to them. And then the actual work starts. Once we got this methods protocol approved, we will start the work and we'll do the review of this knowledge. Then we at the end, of course, write a report. And important, really, again, this report will go to peer review and will not be totally kind of published before we don't have these reviews and have answered every one of these comments. Then we produce the final product, which is often a report, and we will have a meeting again with a requester. Really important to discuss how this was useful, whether something else is needed. Maybe sometimes we complement this with a workshop or other ways of working with a requester to make sure that this is actually policy relevant. And this happens also, this meeting with the requester also happens throughout these projects, throughout the project, so not just at the end. So this is how the whole process works. And again, I just wanted to really stress here that we're widening the participation here, that anyone who feels in the future looks at the Eklipse website and thinks, this is something I know something about, please, we want to hear from you, and you will be heard and your knowledge will be integrated in the different ways that I have already pinpointed. The next slide, please. So you can imagine that it can be quite overwhelming to get a knowledge request, and where does it come from, who makes this knowledge request, and what it is about, and so. So what we have here is that we have very clear criteria how we accept this. So we accept, I would say, just about half or maybe a bit more than half of the requests, because we need these 5 criteria that are really important to us. We need a clear mandate and a strong willingness from policy or other societal actor to follow the Eklipse process. We are not changing this. We are quite strict on this. It will take time, but it's really robust. So we want a clear mandate to follow this request. It has to be very clearly policy relevant. That makes sense in this context I've already talked about. The request should be of a European or at least a wide region relevant. So it can't be really, really on a very tiny kind of scale. It has to be on that kind of scale that is important to us at the European scale. There has to be no duplication. I said this already. The request for knowledge is really important right at the start, and we make sure that there is no duplication. It has to be a cross-sectoral approach, so addressing around the idea of biodiversity, ecosystem services, and so forth. It has to be feasible. It can't be just huge and massive so that it will take years and years. It has to be feasible with the resources that we've been given, and it has to be ethical. It has to comply with our code of ethics. I don't really have time to go into this today, but you can read up on this on our website, and it has to be, of course, pro-biodiversity. Next slide, please. And the final thing, of course, I really want to highlight, this is my final slide for today, for my very short introduction of how Eklipse works, is the people that work for or with Eklipse. We've got the Eklipse management body. It's based at UFZ. They are the only people that are paid. They get the salary from the requests, and they organize basically everything around these requests. They organize the meetings. They make sure that the process is followed, and so forth. So at the head of this Eklipse management body is Marie van der Waal, and she makes sure that this is all happening, really. Then the knowledge coordination body, I'm the co-chair together with Ute Jakob here, and we've got a range of people that will make more, they will make the first decisions. Is a request accepted? Are we going to move forward with it? How do we discuss any changes maybe needed or anything with the requester? And then, of course, I mentioned already the methods expert group, really the workhorse, so to speak, of Eklipse, right? Where we ensure that these methods are suitable and that they are followed and that we really have a very robust request and a very robust output. So all these people, the method expert group and the knowledge coordination body, work for Eklipse for free in kind, and yeah, what they get out of it is this wonderful community where we exchange ideas on science policy and make sure that we stay up to date what is happening in policy and science and bring these two together. And I'll leave you with this wonderful picture, I think, of all these people that are working in this group, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nils. That was really interesting and insightful. And if people could post any questions in the chat, I'm going to ask a few kind of prepared questions first to get us warmed up. And then we hope that we'll have a chance for a group discussion about this and about what it can teach us about knowledge exchange. So I guess I have a personal question for you first, Nils, which is, what drew you personally to working on knowledge exchange between academia and policymakers, and how does it fit within your broader career?
Yes, I think that's a really interesting question, because we all personal motivation is really important in our jobs and in our lives, of course. So as many or some of you know, and you definitely, EJ, know, I've always found conservation science questions really, really interesting. Over the years, I felt that I had built a little bit of a knowledge base, and I felt that I wanted to make this knowledge base kind of count in the real world. But at the same time, also, when I attempted this, I always felt it's not quite, I don't really know what to say to policymakers, or if anyone asks me, how is this useful? And I felt that I wanted to hear more often and more in depth what actually the needs are from the policymakers. And that is surprisingly hard to get into. As a single person, so to speak, you can't just rock up and say, what's your needs, you know, and joining a network like Eklipse made that possible.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know we have some people from DEFRA on this call, so maybe other policymakers as well, and they can perhaps answer some of those questions that you had in your head. So my next question to you is, in your experience, how could knowledge exchange of this type, or any other really, be better embedded within academia?
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can do better. There's a lot of opportunities out there, but it's not always easy to say, oh, okay, then we add another thing to universities and another thing to our network. So I think we have to be smart about how we go about this, and I think therefore we do need to organize ourselves in networks, maybe similar to that. Not every university has a doctoral training program on their own. Lots of universities have got together and are very strong in that doctoral training program. And I feel maybe that's an opportunity for universities that have some kind of similar vision or ideas or strengths could get together and say, we're doing this as a network of universities providing this kind of science policy and knowledge exchange. So that would be my hope, that maybe one day it could be funded in a similar way that doctoral training programs are funded, and that would allow us to put resources to it and also put it much higher on the agenda, which is not always the case in all universities, I think.
Very good. And my last question from the chair before we get into some of the really interesting questions that are coming in online. So I guess you know about Cascade because you're a member of Cascade. What lessons do you think what you've learned from Eklipse could give us for Cascade?
I think for me is when the knowledge exchange, when the requests from policy are really when they are topical, when they are meaningful and rewarding, I think loads of people come and want to be part of this. And I see that we have to have quite a bit of flexibility. So that's something that we need to figure out how we are going to do this. But I feel like there is a lot of interest in this area, and when the topics we're talking about are meaningful and rewarding for everyone, then this exchange, I think, is really flourishing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nils. Right. I'm now going to move into the some of the audience questions. So I think it'd be nice if the person who's asked can unmute and show themselves and ask the question directly. So should we start with Phil?
Thanks, EJ. Thanks, Nils. That was fascinating. You presented that kind of linear thing of the way things when they work really well. And I'm just wondering how you deal with requests that are made a lot more challenging. So has Eklipse turned down any requests? Do some requests take quite a bit of discussion with the requester, as you call them? So just how do you actually define the issue that you're finally going to deal with?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it very briefly. Thanks, Phil, for this question, because that gets into the kind of nitty-gritty of how hard it can be and how difficult it can be to move things forward and everything. But what happens is, I think I mentioned earlier that we accept around about half of the requests, and that is not a system where we have a yes or no and be like, this is rubbish, no. But we maybe have a discussion after the scoping phase, what we call the scoping phase, where we have a call for knowledge. We discuss this with the requester, and the reasons for, let's say, rejecting or not going forward with this request can be manifold. In some cases, it can be that actually nobody knew that the knowledge was already out there and the project is already working on it, then we're not going forward. It can also happen in some cases that, especially from policy, if we feel that the time frame is really too short, the decision need to be made in let's say a few weeks, then it's really hard for us to go into that kind of robust process. So what we call a kind of urgent or fast request is not really what Eklipse does. But more often than not, I would say we have the discussion and we reformulate or we rephrase or we reframe the request, so that we are thinking, so what is a good time frame that the policymaker could work with? What is the next policy cycle looking like, where we could add this knowledge? Where is it useful? Rather than saying, no, we can't do it. We're just working with a requester and thinking, okay, so this is something that we can work on together. Because at the end, it is a collaboration and it is a partnership that we're starting rather than a service.
Super. Anya, would you like to ask your question?
Yay, my video works. Sorry, it's been buffering all day. That was really interesting, thank you. You mentioned about ensuring academia and policy are more connected, and I was wondering if that also matters in terms of a view to fieldwork and how you ensure that you're informing policy in a way that's going to be effective in implementation. Yeah.
That's a very good question. So what we have done in the past is that we're actually often working with more than one requester. So we have had a request where requesters come together and they formulate a request that has quite a broad scope. And that could be that some of them are, for example, NGOs or end users really, and they are then working let's say, with the policymakers, but also with the implementation on the ground, and give us that kind of sense check and the kind of reality check that maybe the project needs. So yeah, a requester, as we call it, doesn't have to be only purely from policy, and it can work together with an NGO. And I think that's a really interesting partnership where we work with these stakeholders together.
Thank you. Yeah, Dave, I don't know if Nils's previous remarks to Phil covered your question, or is there elements of your question that you'd still like to ask? If so, please unveil.
Yeah, maybe just a quick clarification. You pretty much did answer it already, but I was wondering about the kind of time, the difference in timescales, right? Academia tends to move at sort of glacial or geological timescales, and policy a little bit quicker. So just sort of how do you deal with that? Yeah, because policymakers, it's great if they do kind of look forward at the next policy cycle and think that through. But my impression is that sometimes that doesn't always happen. Do you simply say that you can't do that, or yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about the different timescales and how you kind of work it out?
Yeah, so as I said before, like sometimes we literally have to say that this is not feasible within our time scale, and we have to get back to the requester to maybe reformulate or rethink the time scale. But I would also say that at the moment, working with the European Commission and going to the meetings and discuss how the new science service for biodiversity and the Knowledge Center for Biodiversity works, is that there is learning on both sides. I mean, there is a real willingness to think about doing some of these policy processes differently. So I think we have entered into a new phase where we're talking about a partnership. We know that policymakers want this knowledge. They want to tap into the knowledge that is out there, and they're willing to rethink also their timeframes. So I think it's fascinating how that learning is happening together, and that the network like Eklipse or Cascade can actually facilitate this. Because as I said before, going there as a person, as a personal researcher, on your own individual researcher, is really, really hard. But when you have a process, when you have a network of people, then it becomes all of a sudden, I think, much more feasible to actually change some of these practices. And I think I would say there's still a bit of this where some policymakers would say, I need this in 2 weeks' time. But more often than not, we have actually experienced that through discussions and dialogue, we are actually reframing also the timescale. And I think that works really well for us, at least. Yeah. Thank you.
So I was just about to say, would someone who might be a requester like to comment on all of this? And I see that someone who might be a requester has just put his hand up. So James, would you like to say something?
Thank you very much indeed, EJ, and thank you, Nils, for the presentation. Really good to see. And I admire the process. I mean, it's very, very thorough, which is great. What I'm slightly concerned about is how long-winded it is, particularly if you're looking at something really quite chunky, and some of those things will be. So I think there is a key issue here for some of the CBD processes, perhaps, about the march of paper deadlines for meetings, and sort of you sort of, oh, there's a meeting in 2 years' time, but actually you look back in terms of the pre-meetings before that, and then the paper deadlines for each of those meetings, and all of a sudden the timescale is really constrained. You maybe only have 2 or 3 months to be able to produce something. I'm now at the moment looking at what do we need to do in the next few months for papers that will go to the CMS Conference of the Parties in March 2026, but the paper deadline for those is likely to be in October this year, because of fitting in the Scientific Council and advice work there. So there is a real challenge here, I think, in terms of how one thinks things through, maybe not so much in terms of sort of the operational questions, but maybe more in terms of the more strategic ones, in terms of you have a decisions coming out of a conference of the parties, be that CMS, CBD, Ramsar, whichever else, and then there may well be various and sundry decisions taken that need work to be done And then how do you make sure you get that work done? And as somebody working in JNCC, that's actually really quite a challenge, and there will be different people working in different places, and sometimes it's really not clear who's doing what.
Yeah, and I think that's where we've tried to make the Cascade model a little bit different to the Eklipse model, in as much as we're trying to be more agile and responsive and open to very different kinds of engagement. So not just an evidence synthesis. So which is based on the experience of working with you over the last year and others. So yeah. Great. Hazel.
Sorry, can I just add something very
Yeah,
quickly? Yeah. I totally agree with you, James. It is really challenging. And what's maybe interesting is that initially Eklipse has something like what we call a support request rather than an evidence request. But our experience is that this has not been used very often. I think it's we have used this twice now, where we actually support policymakers in going for these big meetings. But I think it's been so popular, our kind of evidence request, that was what we mostly did. So we would be very keen to maybe also work with Cascade to think really how can we be more agile and how can we move forward. At the same time, how can we be robust and transparent? Because that has been the success story of Eklipse, right? So it's a great question, and I don't have the full answer.
I think this is one we're going to continue to need to work on, Nils and Jay. I think this is something that will continue to be a challenge to us all. But I think it's a good challenge in a lot of ways, because I think being able to bring that evidence to bear and try to actually make sure that we are clear about what it is that science is telling us, or traditional knowledge is telling us. Let's be clear, there are other methods of looking at knowledge overall. So it's not just the scientific method we need to be considering here.
Good points. Excellent. Hazel, you had a question about linking with climate modelling.
Yeah, hi there. So thanks. That's really interesting, because we work on a number of European projects in Earth system modelling. One of my roles is to work with the European Commission to try and disseminate that information. We tend to do that in a cluster of projects, really. But I just wondered if there's a role for the type of things that we're doing in Earth systems and climate modelling to provide knowledge in your network. We look at climate impacts, land use, wildfires, ocean biodiversity, tipping points, all these sorts of issues. So I just wondered if there's scope also for that type of knowledge to come through.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's really interesting, and the way we look at it is that, as I said before, the challenge we often have is to make these requests, or these mini projects, or whatever you want to call it. We've tried to make them feasible. Right. So then on one hand, we have to be quite targeted. So what the requester wants. On the other hand, we really try to incorporate everything that is relevant and is important for this. So yeah, it sounds really interesting. And when a request comes through in this area, we're definitely interested in that kind of knowledge and evidence. And it's interesting that you mentioned the cluster, because I think that's what in Eklipse we are engaging with at the moment as well. So I've just been over to Brussels for a marine cluster event, and Eklipse took a part in this, again, in the same way as today, to show the kind of process that we follow and what can be learned from it, but also what can be maybe adapted to the specific situation. So I would be very interested to talk to you more about your cluster activities. It sounds really relevant and really interesting, yeah.
Brilliant. So just coming to Nibu, it sounds like, Nibu, you're a member of the methods expert group. So I wondered if you'd like to say something about how you make those decisions about the kinds of methods that are used. Oh, can't hear you. I'll go to Phil while you sort yourself out and then come back to you. Phil.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Nils. Really, really interesting. I just have a question about how you get opportunities out to the people who are best suited to respond to them. And from the way you spoke, it sounds like the emphasis is on people to follow, follow your channels, follow, consult your website and things. So yeah, I wondered if you could talk a bit about that, but also maybe how that's evolved over the 5 years, because I presume that as you become more prominent or as the network becomes better known, you can kind of rely on that rather than having to be more proactive about how you reach people.
Yeah, so I would say the network is quite extensive now. I mean, we've got several hundred, I think something like 250. I'm just kind of looking it up actually. 262 experts we've had involved. That's actually at the stage of 15 requests. So we've got 19 at the moment. We had probably, well, over 800, probably more, closer to 1,000 people now involved in one way or the other in activities organized by Eklipse. And so far, we of course have some people that return to Eklipse, but more often, I think we have that kind of snowballing where people say, I've done this, you need to have a look at this, whether that's maybe relevant to you. But yeah, I do agree. We rely on a bit on people following our channels. Sometimes what we do as well in the first stage of the scoping stage, which I think is really important, when knowledge requests come in, there's often hundreds of them really, and we get back to these people and say, please tell us more. Would you like to get involved? Do you know someone? So it's a lot of work actually goes into making sure that who gives knowledge to us is also rewarded, so to speak, with a follow-up and so on. So that's where some of the paid people come in that follow up on all these emails and all these people providing knowledge to us. So yeah, so it's a bit of quite an organic network that we have, and also through the policymakers. And lots of policymakers actually have told us that they were once researchers or they were once at university, so they have networks. So it works like this. So, but it's quite informal in a way. Yeah.
I guess so. Sorry if I can just quickly follow up on that. Then, yeah, that also bears then on the communication at the other end. Has there been any difficulty, or are there ongoing challenges with getting the policymakers then, the requesters, to come through you rather than going through the networks that they would have gone through 5 years ago?
That's a good question. And very hard to answer, because at the moment it feels like it's going pretty well. We've got plenty of requests and plenty of things to do, but of course there are other. They also have their networks, and they also have ways that not everything goes through Eklipse, of course. Yeah. So sometimes we're not getting involved, and that I think is maybe a good thing. There are other networks that are also suitable.
Brilliant. I'm going to bring Matt in now, and Matt is from DEFRA, and I think, yeah, it'd be interesting to hear your views.
Hi, Nils. Hi, EJ. Nice to see you. Nice to hear from you again, Nils. And yeah, very nice to hear about Eklipse again. It was just, yeah, sorry, I was being really stupid, really. I couldn't figure out how to put my hand up during that previous conversation. So yeah, I popped it in the chat, but I guess because I work in an evidence team for DEFRA, and I guess our job is being both reactive and kind of proactive in terms of what evidence our policy teams, our negotiation teams are going to need. And I think it's just a case of kind of us knowing what tools are available to us, and for academia, for Cascade to help kind of provide a variety of tools that operate over those different timescales, I guess, for kind of providing evidence to policy. So I think, I love the Eklipse model. I think it's really great. I love the transparency and the robustness of it. But yeah, as was discussed previously, it might be one of the longer term processes, but that doesn't mean it's not useful. That just means that we need to use it for those more forward-looking, more proactive kind of questions that we have that aren't necessarily we've got 2 months to answer a really important question. Maybe Eklipse isn't the tool for that job, but it certainly has a really important place, I think. So thanks.
Brilliant. And Nibu's wrote in the text about the methods expert group, which works in collaboration with the EWG, Niels?
Expert working group.
Expert working group.
Sorry for the
Oh,
acronyms.
look, we can hear now. Excellent. Do you want to say your point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it was a great experience working with the EWG, and I'm very happy that Niels is part of the EWG now. Yes, it's true that decision makers need the answers at within a very short time frame. But there are a range of different methods, and I think Lindix was trying to work on a tool which would help make those decisions a bit more easy on the basis of a tool, an app that one of our postdocs had designed. So I think personally for me, it was a very good experience to work in part of that process, which directly leads to policy. Rarely do we as academics, have any contact otherwise. And before Eklipse was there, as an academic like Nils, who was interested to be a part of this knowledge exchange process, there weren't that many avenues out there. So I echo a lot of Nils' thoughts. Thanks.
Amazing. Well, we're coming towards our end now. I guess I've got to ask the question that everyone might want to ask, which is, how is Eklipse funded?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So at the moment, every requester also has to provide some funding. So the funding depends a little bit on the size of the request and the time we think it will take, and that price is of course slightly different every time, but I would say it's in the range maybe of 50,000-60,000 euros for a normal length request. And at the moment that funds the people at the Eklipse management body that send out all the emails, organize everything. And then the expert working group and the methods expert group, the knowledge coordination body, they all work in kind. So we have all asked our universities or institutions to free up 10% of our time. That model is of course not always easy. But that's in theory how it works. And sometimes some of the request money will be used as well, not only to fund the organization of this, but also to maybe fund a researcher. So to do maybe some of the literature screening or these kind of things. Yeah, but that's how it's funded at the moment, and it seems to work. Mainly because I think, as Nibu was saying, the network is really rewarding, and I think that's where people come back to us and say we want to do this. Yeah.
Okay, so last question before we move on to some public service announcements is if there was one message that you'd like to give the colleagues on this call, based on your experience both with Eklipse and with Cascade, because you've been part of that, what would that message be?
I think if we can move to a really collaborative way of working together, then we will be surprised. I think how we all have very much kind of shared values. We all love working for biodiversity, for nature, for more sustainability, and for people, of course, within these systems. And I think we share so much more, academia and policymakers, than we think. But we need to start this dialogue. So when we meet these people, I think these kind of shared values and the shared aims and objectives that we have can lead to something really fascinating and interesting, and where we have win-win on both sides. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to have closer collaborations with the policymakers, and I say that as a kind of researcher. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nils. So before I move on to Hannah, can we just give Nils a round of virtual or actual applause? Hannah, did you want to share your screen again just very quickly?
Yes, absolutely. Bear with me.
While Hannah is sharing her screen, would just like to say at one point in my life, I was also funded by Eklipse for a short evidence synthesis. Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay.
Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Great. So we wanted to take just a moment at the end to make you aware of the upcoming webinars that we have. So EJ mentioned at the beginning, this first webinar series is a series of 6. So you can see on the screen there 5 more that we have coming up. These are all in 3 broad areas. So one such as today, focusing on mechanisms for knowledge exchange and science to policy. Another is big questions in thematic areas that are relevant to the international conservation space. So you see the next one coming up is big questions in ocean governance, and we also have spatial planning. And then finally, we are theming some of them around international policy processes and how evidence can feed into them. So we have an exciting one on the 2nd of May with David Cooper and Ben Fleming talking about international policy processes. So yeah, do have a look. Please scan the QR code on the screen to go and register for some of those. They'll all be in this exact same time slot, 1 till 2 on a Friday. We thought hopefully that's nice end of the week lunchtime slot for people to come join us, think about some of these topics. You can also visit the Cascade website to find more information and registration links to those. So yeah, do feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. And final thing is just if you want to stay in touch with us at Cascade, we would love to have you in the network. So you can sign up to our mailing list. You can find us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. You can follow our website, and you can also email me as the Cascade coordinator. Any questions that you have, feel free to note down my email. I'll always be happy to chat to people about Cascade. So I think that's everything. I'll hand back to EJ for any final comments and thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, a big thank you to Nils, and a big thank you to all of you for coming along and giving up your lunch break to hear this really interesting talk and to engage with the Cascade Network. Hope to see you all in a couple of weeks' time. And I always like to leave 5 minutes so that everyone can have a cup of tea before their next meeting. So enjoy your free 5 minutes and have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nils.